For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through careful balance and measured force. Species rose and fell under their watchful guidance, civilizations flourished within acceptable parameters, and order reigned supreme across the stars. They had seen empires that could shatter planets, beings who manipulated time itself, and technologies that bent reality to their will. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for humanity. When Earth first made contact, the Council dismissed them as another primitive species destined for either quick assimilation or equally quick extinction. Humans were small, weak, short-lived creatures from a backwater system with laughably primitive technology. What threat could they possibly pose? The Council's first mistake was underestimating human adaptability. Their second was underestimating human determination. Their third, and most catastrophic mistake, was believing they could control what they had created when they took Earth's greatest warrior and tried to break him. They should have killed Marcus Chen when they had the chance. Instead, they made him into something far more dangerous than any weapon they had ever encountered. They had created the one thing that could bring their ancient empire to its knees, a human with nothing left to lose and every reason to fight. Now, as emergency klaxons wailed through the Council's most secure facility and their greatest prisoner walked free, they finally understood the truth that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity didn't just fight wars. They became war itself. And Marcus Chen was about to remind the universe why you never cage a predator and expect it to thank you for the privilege. The cell was perfect in its cruelty. 3 meters by 3 meters of polished metal walls that reflected distorted images back at the occupant, designed specifically to fragment the mind and break the spirit of even the strongest beings. The temperature fluctuated randomly between freezing and sweltering, the lighting shifted from blinding brightness to absolute darkness without pattern or warning, and the artificial gravity occasionally reversed or disappeared entirely, leaving the prisoner floating helplessly in the void. Marcus Chen had been in this cell for 827 days. He had counted every single one. The Galactic Council believed they were slowly driving him insane. What they didn't understand was that Marcus had already visited the darkest corners of madness during his first month of captivity and had dragged himself back out through sheer force of will. Now he sat in the lotus position at the center of his cell, eyes closed, breathing steady, as the walls around him strobed from white to black and back again. His mind was not breaking. It was sharpening. When the humans had first encountered the Galactic Council 5 years ago, they had been woefully outmatched. Earth's most advanced weapons were primitive toys compared to Council technology. Their fastest ships moved like crawling insects compared to Council vessels that could fold space itself. But humanity had something the Council had long forgotten about: the ability to adapt and the refusal to surrender. Marcus had been Earth's supreme combatant, a title that sounded grandiose but simply meant he was the best soldier humanity could produce. He had led the first resistance movements when the Council decided Earth needed correction for refusing to submit to their authority. While diplomats talked and politicians schemed, Marcus had done what humans did best: he had fought. The war had lasted 3 years. 3 years of humanity using guerrilla tactics, improvised weapons, and sheer bloody-minded determination to hold off a force that had conquered half the galaxy. They had turned their cities into fortresses, their children into soldiers, and their planet into a death trap for any invader foolish enough to set foot on the surface. Marcus had personally accounted for 17 Council warships, including 2 dreadnoughts that were supposed to be indestructible. He had led raids on orbital platforms, coordinated strikes on supply lines, and earned a reputation that made seasoned Council veterans request transfers rather than face him in battle. The Council's military commanders had started calling him the Ghost of Terra because he seemed to appear wherever they least expected him, always with devastating results. But even ghosts could be trapped, and Marcus had made one critical mistake. He had trusted. The Council had approached Earth's government with an offer of negotiation. They would discuss terms for peace if Earth would send its supreme combatant as a gesture of good faith. Marcus had known it was likely a trap, but the alternative was watching his homeworld burn under orbital bombardment. So he had gone, alone, in a single shuttle to the Council's massive station at the edge of the solar system. The moment he had stepped aboard, the negotiation had revealed itself to be an elaborate ruse. The Council had no intention of making peace with humanity. They simply wanted to study the being who had caused them such unprecedented trouble. They wanted to understand what made humans so dangerous, and they were willing to spend years dissecting Marcus piece by piece to find the answer. The physical torture had been expected and, ultimately, pointless. Marcus had endured worse during his military training on Earth, and pain was just another sensation to be catalogued and filed away. The psychological warfare was more sophisticated but equally futile. The Council's experts in mental manipulation had spent centuries perfecting techniques that could break any known species, but they had never encountered a human mind before. What they discovered, much to their growing alarm, was that human psychology was fundamentally different from anything in their experience. Other species had logical breaking points, predictable stress responses, and rational limits to their endurance. Humans seemed to operate on principles that defied galactic understanding. They became more dangerous when cornered, more creative under pressure, and more determined when faced with impossible odds. The Council's scientists had tried everything. They had subjected Marcus to memory manipulation devices that should have erased his identity entirely. Instead, he had somehow strengthened his core memories and made them more vivid. They had used neural inhibitors that should have made him docile and compliant. Instead, he had learned to work around the inhibitors and maintain his clarity of thought. They had exposed him to fear-inducing chemicals that drove other species into catatonic terror. Marcus had simply adapted, developing an immunity that their biologists claimed was theoretically impossible. After 2 years of failed experiments, the Council had changed tactics. Instead of trying to break Marcus directly, they had decided to study him like a specimen. They had moved him to this special cell, installed monitoring equipment that tracked everything from his brainwaves to his cellular regeneration rates, and begun a long-term observation program designed to unlock the secrets of human resilience. What they were learning frightened them more with each passing day. Marcus had not simply endured their tortures. He had learned from them. Every technique they used on him, every piece of technology they exposed him to, every security protocol they revealed in his presence became part of his growing understanding of Council capabilities and weaknesses. While they thought they were studying him, he had been studying them right back. The Council's arrogance was their greatest vulnerability. They had never encountered a species that could match their technological superiority, so they had grown careless about basic security measures. They discussed classified information in his presence, assuming he was too broken or drugged to understand. They brought their most advanced equipment near his cell, confident that containment fields would prevent any problems. They had even allowed him access to their computer networks during certain experiments, believing their encryption was too sophisticated for a primitive human mind to comprehend. They were wrong on all counts. Marcus had been born in the slums of Neo-Singapore, where survival meant learning to read people and situations faster than the gangs could kill you. He had been educated in the finest military academies on Earth, where strategy and tactics were drilled into students until they could plan campaigns in their sleep. He had fought in conflicts on 6 continents before the age of 25, accumulating practical experience in warfare that most Council officers never gained in their entire careers. But, more than his education or experience, Marcus possessed something that set humans apart from every other species the Council had encountered: the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to find opportunity where others saw only despair, and to turn weakness into strength through sheer force of will. During his time in captivity, Marcus had mapped the entire facility where he was being held. He knew the shift schedules of every guard, the frequency patterns of every security sweep, and the exact timing of every automatic system. He had identified 17 different ways to escape his cell, 12 routes through the facility that would avoid most security measures, and 3 potential exit strategies that could get him off the station entirely. He had also been monitoring Council communications through subtle observation of his captor's behavior and the few computer interfaces he could glimpse during transport between testing areas. The news was not good for Earth. In his absence, human resistance had begun to crumble. Without his tactical leadership and inspirational presence, the scattered rebel cells were being systematically hunted down and eliminated. His homeworld was slowly bleeding to death while he sat in this sterile cage. But Marcus had learned patience during his captivity. He had learned to think in longer terms, to plan for contingencies that stretched years into the future, and to prepare for opportunities that might never come. The Council had given him something precious without realizing it: time. Time to observe, to learn, and to prepare for the moment when their carefully constructed prison would become the launching point for their destruction. That moment was coming soon. Marcus could feel it in the changing patterns of guard rotation, in the increasing frequency of emergency drills, and in the subtle tension that had begun to permeate the facility over the past few weeks. Something was happening in the wider galaxy, something that had the Council worried enough to modify their security protocols and increase their defensive measures. Marcus opened his eyes as the cell lighting stabilized at a dim amber glow, indicating the beginning of another artificial night cycle. On the wall across from him, his reflection stared back from the polished metal surface. He looked older than his 32 years, scarred by the Council's experiments and marked by nearly 3 years of captivity. But his eyes still held the same fierce intelligence that had made him Earth's greatest military mind, and his body, despite their attempts to weaken it, remained coiled with barely contained energy. The Council had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They believed that isolation and suffering would eventually break any individual, that enough pressure applied over enough time would reduce even the strongest person to a compliant shadow of their former self. What they failed to grasp was that humans were pack animals at their core, and a human fighting for his people became something far more dangerous than any individual warrior. Marcus was not just fighting for his own freedom anymore. He was fighting for every human who had died while he was trapped in this cell, for every child who had learned to fear the sky because Council ships might appear at any moment, and for the future of his species. The Council had turned him into a symbol of human resistance, and now they were about to discover what happened when symbols came to life. The ambient temperature began to drop, another attempt to disturb his sleep cycle and maintain psychological pressure. Marcus ignored it, focusing instead on the subtle vibration he had begun to feel through the floor over the past 3 days. It was barely perceptible, probably unnoticed by anyone who hadn't spent nearly 3 years learning every nuance of the facility's operation, but it was there. Something was changing in the station's power distribution systems, small fluctuations that suggested major modifications to their defensive capabilities. Marcus smiled for the first time in months. Change meant opportunity, and opportunity meant hope. The Council was about to learn why humanity had earned its reputation as the most dangerous species they had ever encountered. They had wanted to study human nature, to understand what made his people such effective warriors. They were about to get a demonstration that would answer all their questions. High Counselor Zephix moved through the corridors of Detention Facility Prime with the measured steps of someone carrying the weight of an empire on their shoulders. The massive station orbited a dead star in the neutral zone between Council space and the Outer Rim, a location chosen specifically for its isolation and the natural interference that would mask any activities taking place within its walls. As the senior member of the Scientific Council and primary authority on xenobiological research, Zephix had overseen the human subject's containment and study since his capture. The results had been disturbing beyond their worst projections. Zephix paused at an observation window that looked down into the primary research bay, where teams of scientists from 12 different species worked around the clock to process data from their human subject. The sheer volume of information was staggering. In nearly 3 years of observation, they had documented over 15,000 distinct behavioral patterns, physiological adaptations, and cognitive responses that defied every established model of sentient psychology. "High Counselor," came a voice from behind them. Dr. Crix, the facility's chief psychologist, approached with a data pad clutched in their forearms. The insectoid being's compound eyes flickered with barely contained anxiety. "I need to discuss the latest neural scans with you immediately." Zephix turned, noting the tremor in Crix's voice. In all their years of working together, they had never seen the normally unflappable scientist display such obvious distress. "What has you so agitated, Doctor?" "The human's brain patterns have changed again," Crix said, mandibles clicking nervously. "For the past 6 months, we've been seeing increased activity in the regions associated with strategic planning and long-term memory consolidation. We initially attributed this to natural adaptation to prolonged isolation. But the latest scans show something unprecedented." Crix activated the datapad, displaying a complex 3-dimensional model of Marcus Chen's brain with various regions highlighted in different colors. His neural pathways have been reorganizing themselves. Not just adapting, actually restructuring at the cellular level. The areas responsible for spatial reasoning have expanded by 12%. His memory centers show activity patterns we've never documented in any known species. And, most concerning of all, the regions controlling executive function and tactical analysis are operating at efficiency levels that should be biologically impossible. Zephyx studied the display, feeling a chill run through their elongated frame. Are you suggesting the human is somehow improving during his captivity? I'm stating it as fact, Crix replied bluntly. Whatever we've been doing to him hasn't broken his mind. It's made it stronger. More focused. More dangerous. High Counselor, I believe we may have inadvertently created something far beyond our ability to control. Before Zephyx could respond, emergency lighting began flashing throughout the corridor, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. The facility's communication system crackled to life with the voice of Commander Vortok, the station's military chief. High Counselor Zephyx to Command Center immediately. We have a significant security situation developing. Zephyx and Crix exchanged glances before hurrying toward the facility's command hub. The corridors were suddenly busy with security personnel moving to defensive positions, their movements suggesting urgency but not panic. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to trigger enhanced protocols but not catastrophic enough to warrant full evacuation procedures. The command center was a hive of activity when they arrived. Dozens of technicians monitored displays showing every aspect of the facility's operation, from power distribution to atmospheric controls. Commander Vortok stood at the central command station, his reptilian features set in a grim expression as he studied a tactical display showing the space around the station. Report, Zephyx demanded as they approached. Vortok gestured to the main screen, which showed 3 ships approaching from the edge of the system. The vessels were of human design, crude and angular compared to Council ships but moving with surprising speed. Long-range sensors detected these ships approximately 2 hours ago. They're maintaining communication silence and approaching on a vector that suggests hostile intent. Human ships? Zephyx studied the display more carefully. How did they find this location? Our security protocols should have made detection impossible. That's what concerns me most, Vortok replied. This facility's location is classified at the highest levels. Only a few dozen beings in the entire galaxy know these coordinates, and all of them have been thoroughly vetted. There's no way the humans should have been able to locate us unless they had inside information. Dr. Crix moved to a nearby console and began accessing the monitoring data from Marcus Chen's cell. High Counselor, we need to consider the possibility that our subject has been communicating with his people somehow. Impossible, Vortok said dismissively. The containment cell blocks all electromagnetic radiation. No signals can get in or out. Then, explain how 3 human warships happen to be approaching our most secret facility, Crix shot back, their voice sharp with frustration. Zephyx watched the approaching ships on the tactical display, noting their formation and approach pattern. Commander, what's the estimated time until they reach weapons range? 47 minutes at current approach speed, Vortok replied. But, High Counselor, we have nothing to worry about. This station is equipped with defensive systems capable of destroying an entire fleet. 3 primitive human ships pose no meaningful threat. I wouldn't be so confident, Zephyx murmured, remembering all the reports they had received about human tactical capabilities during the war. Dr. Crix, I want you to increase monitoring on the human subject immediately. If there's any change in his behavior or vital signs, I want to know about it instantly. Already on it, Crix said, manipulating their console controls. The main display switched to show Marcus Chen's cell, where the human sat motionless in his typical meditation position. Interesting. His heart rate and brain activity have actually decreased over the past hour. Most beings would show signs of stress if they somehow knew rescue was approaching. Unless he's not being rescued, Zephyx said quietly. Unless this is something else entirely. The next 30 minutes passed in tense silence as the human ships continued their approach. Council defensive systems came online, weapon batteries tracking the incoming vessels and shield generators building power for potential combat. Every sensor on the station was focused on the approaching threat, analyzing their capabilities and preparing countermeasures. Marcus Chen remained perfectly still in his cell, giving no indication that he was aware of the developing situation. When the human ships reached the outer perimeter of the station's defensive grid, they did exactly what no one expected. They stopped.
Why aren't they attacking?
Vortok muttered, staring at the tactical display in confusion.
They're sitting in perfect firing position for our long-range weapons. Any competent military commander would know they're completely vulnerable. Maybe they're trying to negotiate, suggested a junior officer. Humans don't negotiate when they come in warships, Zethix replied grimly.
Commander, scan those vessels again.
I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. The enhanced sensor sweep took several minutes to complete, and, when the results appeared on screen, the command center fell silent.
Each human ship was showing massive energy buildups in systems that didn't match any known weapon configurations. More disturbing still, the readings indicated the ships were somehow linked together, their power systems synchronized in a pattern that suggested they were functioning as a single unit rather than three independent vessels.
High Counselor, the sensor technician called out, voice tight with worry.
I'm detecting some kind of exotic particle buildup around the human ships. The pattern matches theoretical models for spatial manipulation technology, but the energy requirements should be impossible to achieve with their level of technology. Zethix felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place in their mind, forming a picture that terrified them.
Dr. Crix, how long has our subject been aware of Council spatial manipulation technology?
Since the third month of his captivity, Crix replied.
We exposed him to several different applications during our testing procedures. Why?
Because humans have a documented ability to reverse engineer technology at an unprecedented rate, Zethix said, moving to the communications station.
Commander, raise shields to maximum and charge all defensive weapons.
I believe we're about to witness something we're not prepared for. As if responding to their words, the three human ships suddenly blazed with energy. Space around them began to distort, reality bending in ways that made the station's sensors scream warnings about impossible readings. The ships themselves seemed to phase in and out of normal space, becoming translucent before solidifying again.
They're creating a localized spacetime distortion, the sensor technician reported, voice rising with panic.
The gravitational effects are off the charts. If they destabilize that field, it could create a cascade effect that destroys everything within a light-year radius.
They wouldn't, Vortok breathed. They couldn't. That level of spatial manipulation would require computational power beyond anything they possess. Zethix looked back at the monitor showing Marcus Chen's cell.
The human had opened his eyes and was looking directly at the camera, as if he could see through the metal and electronics to the command center beyond. For the first time since his capture, he was smiling.
Unless they had someone who understood our systems well enough to guide them, Zethix whispered.
Someone who had spent years studying our technology, learning our methods, and planning for exactly this moment.
The realization hit the command center like a physical blow.
Marcus Chen hadn't been slowly broken by his captivity.
He had been using it.
Every experiment they had performed on him, every technology they had exposed him to, every security protocol they had revealed in his presence had been carefully catalogued and transmitted somehow to his people.
But how? Dr. Crix demanded. The containment field blocks all electromagnetic radiation.
There's no way he could have communicated with anyone outside this facility. Zethix watched as the spacetime distortion around the human ships continued to build, warping light itself into strange patterns.
Electromagnetic radiation isn't the only way to transmit information, they said quietly. Humans have always been remarkably creative when it comes to communication.
On the screen, Marcus Chen stood up slowly and walked to the center of his cell. He raised one hand and tapped against the wall in a complex rhythm, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short again. Then, he repeated the pattern, over and over. Morse code, Zethix realized with growing horror.
An ancient human communication system based on sound patterns. If he's been tapping messages into the station's hull.
The gravitational sensors would have picked up the micro-vibrations, Crix finished, understanding dawning in their compound eyes. Over nearly 3 years, he could have transmitted detailed technical specifications, facility layouts, security protocols. The space around the human ship suddenly stabilized, the chaotic distortions resolving into something far more controlled but equally terrifying. The 3 vessels were no longer sitting in normal space. they had somehow created a pocket dimension around themselves, a bubble of reality that operated by different rules than the universe around them.
"Commander," Zephyx said urgently, "how long until we can evacuate essential personnel?"
Vortok checked his displays and paled. The evacuation shuttles need at least 20 minutes to reach minimum safe distance from whatever those ships are doing.
"We don't have 20 minutes, Zephyx replied, watching as the human ships began to move again, their bubble of distorted spacetime carrying them toward the station at impossible speed.
"All hands, prepare for immediate evacuation.
This facility is compromised."
In his cell, Marcus Chen continued tapping his message against the wall, his smile growing wider as the sound of approaching engines began to vibrate through the station's hull. After 827 days of careful planning and patient preparation, the first phase of his escape was about to begin. The Council had wanted to study human nature. They were about to get a comprehensive lesson in why humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to turn any situation, no matter how hopeless, into an opportunity for victory. The station shuddered as the human ships made contact with the outer defensive grid. What should have been a devastating barrage of energy weapons instead became something far more unsettling. The defenses simply stopped working. One by one, weapon batteries went offline, shield generators powered down, and sensor arrays went dark. The humans weren't destroying the station's defenses, they were somehow turning them off.
"How is this possible?"
Commander Vortok demanded, his clawed hands dancing across control interfaces that refused to respond. "These systems are hardened against every known form of electronic warfare.
They can't be hacked remotely." "They're not being hacked," Dr. Crix replied, studying the cascade of system failures on their displays.
"The shutdown commands are coming from inside the station.
Someone with administrative access is manually disabling our defenses." High Counselor Zephyx felt a chill of understanding wash over them.
"The human has been watching us work for 3 years. He's seen every maintenance procedure, every security override, every emergency protocol.
He knows our systems better than we do. But he's locked in a containment cell."
Vortok protested.
"He can't access anything from there."
"He doesn't need to access anything directly," Zephyx realized, moving to the monitor showing Marcus Chen's cell. The human had stopped tapping his Morse code message and was now standing perfectly still, eyes closed as if listening for something. "He's been preparing for this moment since the day we captured him."
The station's lights flickered as more systems went offline.
Emergency power kicked in, bathing the corridors in the red glow of crisis lighting. Through it all, the 3 human ships continued their approach, moving through the station's defensive perimeter as if it didn't exist. "High Counselor," the communications officer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel."
"Audio only."
"Put it through," Zephyx ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was calm, professional, and utterly without mercy.
"This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Liberation Force. You are holding a human prisoner in violation of interstellar law. You will release him immediately and surrender this facility, or we will take it by force." Vortok activated the response system. "This is Commander Vortok of Council Defense Force Station 77 Alpha. You are in violation of Council space and will withdraw immediately or face destruction."
"Commander," came the reply, and there was something in the woman's voice that made Zephyx's skin crawl. "You have exactly 10 minutes to bring Marcus Chen to your primary docking bay.
After that, we stop being polite." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence.
"Chen," Dr. Crix whispered.
"The same family name. Could she be related to our subject?"
Zephyx was studying the tactical display, noting how the human ships had positioned themselves to block all escape routes from the station.
"It doesn't matter who she is.
What matters is that we're dealing with humans who've had 3 years to plan this operation, and our primary advantage, technological superiority, has been neutralized. We still have superior numbers," Vortok said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This station has a garrison of 3,000 security personnel.
3 ships can't possibly."
His words were cut off as every screen in the command center suddenly displayed the same image, Marcus Chen's face, looking directly at them through the monitor in his cell. "Hello, High Counselor Zephyx," he said, his voice somehow broadcasting through the facility's communication system despite being in a cell that should have blocked all transmissions. I want to thank you for your hospitality over the past few years.
You've been very educational. How is he doing this? Vortok demanded, frantically trying to cut the transmission. Marcus continued as if he hadn't heard the question. You've spent 3 years trying to understand what makes humans dangerous. I thought I'd give you a practical demonstration before I leave.
Consider it a graduation present. Every door in the facility suddenly unlocked with an audible click that echoed through the corridors. Emergency bulkheads retracted, security barriers disengaged, and containment fields throughout the research levels deactivated simultaneously. In the space of 5 seconds, the most secure facility in Council space had become completely open.
Impossible, Crix breathed. The security systems have multiple redundancies, isolated power sources, manual overrides. There's no single point of failure that could cause total system breakdown. Unless someone spent years learning every weakness, every backup system, every emergency protocol, Zephyx replied grimly.
They were beginning to understand just how badly they had underestimated their prisoner.
Marcus Chen smiled on every screen in the facility.
You made one critical error in your planning, High Counselor. You assumed that keeping me alive for study was worth the risk.
You should have killed me the moment you had me in custody. The lights went out.
Emergency power lasted exactly 30 seconds before that too disappeared, plunging the entire facility into absolute darkness. The only illumination came from the emergency glow strips that ran along the floor, strips that began flickering in patterns that looked almost like Morse code. He's communicating with his people through the emergency lighting, Zephyx realized. Everything we've built here, every security measure we've put in place, he's turned it all into tools for his escape. When the lights came back on 60 seconds later, every screen in the command center showed the same thing, an empty cell.
Marcus Chen was gone. Lock down the facility.
Vortok roared.
Seal every sector. Deploy all security teams.
With what? The security chief replied, gesturing helplessly at his non-responsive controls.
Half our systems are offline and the other half are working against us.
The humans have control of our own station. Zephyx moved to the tactical display, trying to understand the scope of what they were facing.
Dr. Crix, how many other prisoners are being held on research levels?
Crix consulted their datapad, face paling as they read.
47 beings from 18 different species.
All of them subjects in various psychological and biological studies.
All of them now free. And how many of them have reason to hate the Council?
All of them, Crix whispered.
Throughout the station, chaos was erupting.
Security teams found themselves facing not just one escaped human, but dozens of angry prisoners who had been subjected to years of experimentation. Worse still, many of these beings possessed natural abilities that made them formidable opponents even without weapons. A telepathic Zephyrian was turning guards against each other with mental manipulation. A Kraxan berserker was literally tearing through bulkheads with his bear claws. And, somewhere in the maze of corridors, Marcus Chen was moving with the efficiency of someone who had spent 3 years memorizing every inch of the facility.
Security Team Alpha 7, report, Vortok called into his communicator. Static was his only answer. Security Team Beta 4, respond. More static.
Sir, the communications officer said quietly, I'm not receiving responses from any teams in sectors 12 through 18.
Either their equipment has malfunctioned or they're dead, Zephyx finished.
They turned to address the command center staff.
All non-essential personnel are to evacuate immediately. This facility is lost. High Counselor, Vortok protested, we can't simply abandon our position.
The research data is worthless if we're all dead, Zephyx cut him off.
Commander, you have combat experience. Tell me honestly, can we retake this facility?
Vortok looked at the displays showing system failures throughout the station, then, at the tactical screen where the 3 human ships waited patiently outside. Not against an enemy who knows our capabilities better than we do and has 3 years' worth of intelligence on our operations. Our best option is evacuation and orbital bombardment once we reach safe distance.
Negative on the bombardment, came a new voice from the communication system.
Captain Sarah Chen's voice was broadcast throughout the facility now, her words reaching every corridor and chamber.
"We have people on that station, Commander. Any attempt to destroy the facility will be considered an act of war against Earth itself."
"You're already committing an act of war,"
Vortok replied angrily. "No, Commander. We're conducting a rescue operation."
"There's a significant difference, though I don't expect you to understand it." Zephyx activated their own communicator, addressing the human captain directly.
"Captain Chen, I am High Counselor Zephyx of the Galactic Council Science Directorate.
I'm willing to negotiate the release of your prisoner in exchange for the safety of my personnel." The laugh that came through the speakers was cold and utterly without humor. "High Counselor, you've had Marcus Chen in custody for 827 days. You've subjected him to torture, experimentation, and psychological warfare. You've used him as a laboratory specimen while his world burned under your attacks.
And now you want to negotiate? What do you want?" Zephyx asked simply. "We want justice," Sarah Chan replied.
"But we'll settle for watching you run." The main display in the command center suddenly changed to show a live feed from one of the station's corridor cameras. Marcus Chen was walking calmly through the research level, no longer wearing prison clothes but somehow having acquired a standard council security uniform. As they watched, he approached a sealed laboratory door and placed his hand on the access panel. The door immediately slid open.
"How does he have security clearance?" someone whispered.
"He doesn't need clearance," Dr. Crix realized with growing horror.
"He knows the emergency override codes for every system on this station. We used them in front of him during maintenance procedures."
Marcus disappeared into the laboratory and emerged moments later carrying something that made Zephyx's blood freeze, a council military-grade plasma rifle. Worse still, he was carrying it with the easy familiarity of someone who had used such weapons before.
"High Counselor," Vortok said urgently, "we need to evacuate now. Whatever the humans are planning, we don't want to be here when it happens." Zephyx nodded reluctantly.
"All personnel to evacuation stations.
Emergency protocols are now in effect." As alarms began wailing throughout the facility, Zephyx took one last look at the tactical display.
The three human ships had moved closer now, taking position around the station like predators surrounding wounded prey. After 3 years of studying human nature, the Council was finally getting a practical demonstration of what made the species so dangerous. They learned quickly, they adapted faster than any other species in known space, and they never, ever forgot a wrong done to them.
High Counselor Zephyx had spent their entire career believing that superior technology and overwhelming force were the keys to galactic dominance.
Marcus Chen was about to teach them that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the universe was a patient mind with nothing left to lose. The evacuation had begun, but Zephyx suspected it was already too late. The humans hadn't come here just to rescue their soldier. They had come to send a message to the entire galaxy, and that message was about to be written in the ruins of the Council's most secure facility. The ghost of terror was awake, and the hunt had begun. Marcus Chen moved through the corridors of Detention Facility Prime with the fluid grace of a predator in its element. Every step was calculated, every movement purposeful. The plasma rifle in his hands felt familiar despite its alien design. 3 years of watching Council security teams had taught him exactly how to operate their equipment.
More importantly, 3 years of careful observation had shown him every weakness in their tactical doctrines.
The first security team he encountered was positioned at a junction leading to the facility's primary computer core. 5 Council soldiers in full combat armor, weapons trained on the approach corridor, confident in their superior position and firepower. They were following standard defensive protocols, exactly as Marcus had observed dozens of times during security drills. That predictability would be their downfall.
Marcus didn't approach from the corridor they were watching.
Instead, he moved through the maintenance shafts that ran parallel to the main passages, shafts he had mapped in his mind during countless hours of listening to repair crews work above his cell. He emerged behind their position through a ventilation grate, and, by the time the first soldier realized they were flanked, 3 of them were already down. The remaining 2 Council troops spun to face the new threat, but their heavy armor made them slow and clumsy in the cramped space. Marcus moved between them like smoke, using their own positions against them, forcing them to block each other's lines of fire.
When the brief engagement was over, all 5 soldiers lay unconscious. Marcus had deliberately used non-lethal settings on their own weapons. He wasn't here to commit genocide. He was here to prove a point.
The computer core was exactly where he had calculated it would be, 3 levels down from his cell, protected by multiple security barriers that were now standing open thanks to his systematic shutdown of the facility's defensive systems. Marcus approached the primary interface terminal and began entering commands with the confidence of someone who had spent years watching Council technicians work.
"Status report on the human prisoner," he said aloud, accessing the facility's records. The computer responded in the flat, emotionless tone of Council artificial intelligence. "Subject designation Human Prime has been in custody for 827 days. Physical condition, stable despite repeated stress testing. Mental condition, anomalous brain activity suggesting accelerated cognitive development rather than deterioration. Escape probability assessment, 0.001%. Marcus smiled grimly. "Computer, revise escape probability assessment. Revision requires administrator authorization. Authorization code, Zephix Prime 77 Alpha Emergency Override Omega. Authorization accepted. Please specify new probability assessment. 100%. Escape has already occurred."
The computer paused for exactly 1.3 seconds, an eternity in artificial intelligence terms.
Error. Subject Human Prime is currently contained in detention cell 77 Alpha. Negative. Subject Human Prime is currently accessing your primary data core. I suggest you update your records. Another pause, longer this time. Identity confirmation required. Please submit to biometric scanning.
Marcus placed his hand on the scanning pad. Blue light swept over his palm, analyzing genetic markers, fingerprints, and cellular structure. Identity confirmed, the computer announced with what might have been surprise if it were capable of such emotions.
Subject Human Prime. How did you achieve freedom from your containment cell?
I didn't escape from my cell, Marcus replied, accessing deeper levels of the facility's operating system.
I turned my cell into a command center.
Every system you exposed me to, every procedure you let me observe, every maintenance routine I heard through the walls, I catalogued all of it and waited for the right moment to use it against you. While he spoke, Marcus was uploading a program he had spent 3 years perfecting in his mind, code written in pure thought during the endless hours of isolation, refined through constant mental rehearsal, and, now finally, implemented in the Council's own computer systems. "What are you doing?" the computer asked, its voice taking on an almost anxious tone as it detected unauthorized modifications to its core programming. "I'm giving you a gift," Marcus replied. "For 3 years, the Council has been trying to understand human psychology through direct observation. I'm about to provide them with comprehensive data on human tactical capabilities. Consider it educational material." The program finished uploading, and immediately the facility's systems began operating under new parameters. Security cameras throughout the station started tracking Council personnel instead of intruders. Internal sensors began identifying escape routes and safe passages, but only for the escaped prisoners. Most importantly, the computer began actively assisting anyone fighting against Council forces. "This is highly irregular," the computer protested. "My primary programming requires me to maintain facility security and protect Council personnel." "Check your new programming," Marcus suggested. "You'll find that protecting prisoners from unauthorized experimentation takes precedence over Council safety." "I simply reminded you of some legal protocols that were being ignored." The artificial intelligence fell silent as it processed the implications of its revised code structure. Council computers were designed to follow legal frameworks absolutely, they couldn't be programmed to violate interstellar law without multiple safeguards. Marcus had spent months listening to technicians discuss these limitations during maintenance procedures, learning exactly how to exploit them. An alarm began blaring throughout the facility, not the emergency evacuation signal that had been sounding earlier, but something far more ominous. This was the alarm that indicated complete system compromise, the sound that meant the facility's own computer had been turned against its operators. "Sir," came a voice through the facility's communication system. It was Captain Sarah Chen, transmitted from her ship outside.
We're detecting massive changes in the station's operational status. Are you ready for extraction? Marcus activated a communications panel. Not yet, Captain. I have one more stop to make.
Sir, the Council evacuation ships are beginning to withdraw.
If we wait much longer, they might escape with critical intelligence. Let them go, Marcus replied. The ones who matter won't be on the evacuation ships. He left the computer core and made his way toward the facility's detention levels, where other prisoners were still trapped in cells similar to the one he had occupied. Along the way, he encountered more Council security teams, but each engagement was easier than the last. The facility's computer was now actively working against them, locking doors to trap them, rerouting their communications to prevent coordination, and even flooding corridors with gas from the fire suppression systems. The first prisoner Marcus liberated was a Zephyrian telepath who had been subjected to neural mapping experiments for over 2 years. The being was barely conscious when Marcus opened the cell, but their mental abilities were still intact. Human, the Zephyrian whispered, their voice echoing directly in Marcus's mind. You are different from what I expected. Your thoughts are shielded, organized. You have been preparing for this for a long time. We all have, Marcus replied, helping the being to their feet. Can you contact the others? Let them know they're free? The Zephyrian closed their eyes, reaching out with telepathic senses that could span entire star systems. They know. And, human, they are angry. The Council has made enemies of species they did not even know existed. One by one, Marcus freed the other prisoners. A Kraxan berserker who had been subjected to aggression enhancement experiments. A silicate crystal being who had been forced to demonstrate their ability to interface with electronic systems. A shape-shifting morph who had been studied to understand their cellular regeneration capabilities. Each of them had been imprisoned for years, each had been subjected to procedures that violated every known law of interstellar civilization, and each now understood exactly who was responsible for their suffering. The Council believed they were above the law, Marcus explained to the growing group of freed prisoners. They thought their technological superiority gave them the right to experiment on anyone they chose. It's time to prove them wrong. The Kraxan berserker, nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor plating, flexed claws that could tear through metal. What would you have us do, human? Simply escape? Or do you have something more comprehensive in mind? Marcus smiled, and every freed prisoner felt a chill at the expression. The Council wanted to study us to understand what makes different species dangerous. I think we should give them a practical demonstration. But we do this smart, not just angry. We make sure the entire galaxy learns what happened here. He led them to the facility's main broadcast center, where Council propaganda and scientific reports were transmitted across known space. The equipment was sophisticated enough to reach every major civilization in the galaxy, exactly what Marcus needed for the final phase of his plan. Computer, he said, addressing the now loyal artificial intelligence, prepare for galaxy-wide broadcast on all frequencies. Emergency priority transmission. Broadcasting capability is reserved for Council authorities only, the computer replied, but without conviction. Check my authorization codes again. I think you'll find my clearance has been upgraded. The computer processed his request and found that Marcus Chen now had the highest possible security clearance in its database. The program he had uploaded earlier had been more comprehensive than simple facility control, it had completely revised his status within Council systems. Broadcasting capability enabled, the computer confirmed. You have access to all communication networks within Council space. Marcus stepped up to the primary transmission console, aware that in a few moments his words would be heard on thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Behind him, the freed prisoners gathered living proof of Council atrocities, beings who had been tortured and experimented on for the crime of being different. This is Marcus Chen, Supreme Combatant of Earth, speaking from Council Detention Facility Prime, he began, his voice carrying across space to every corner of known civilization. For 3 years, the Galactic Council has held me prisoner in violation of interstellar law. For years before that, they held dozens of other beings in similar conditions, subjecting them to experiments that would be considered war crimes if committed by any other species.
He gestured to the creatures behind him, each one representing a different civilization that had been victimized by Council arrogance. The Council claims to maintain peace and order, but their version of peace requires the oppression of anyone who refuses to submit to their authority. Their version of order requires the torture of innocence in the name of scientific advancement. The Zephyrian telepath stepped forward, their voice somehow carrying through the transmission despite their weakened condition. The thoughts of the Council leadership are known to me. They feel no remorse for their actions. They see us as laboratory specimens, not as sentient beings deserving of rights and dignity. The Kraxan berserker raised one massive claw to the camera. My people were told I died fighting Council forces. They do not know I have spent 2 years being dissected and reconstructed to test their medical technologies. Today, they learn the truth. One by one, each freed prisoner testified to their treatment at Council hands. Their words went out across the galaxy, reaching civilizations that had been allies of the Council, neutral parties who had stayed out of galactic politics, and enemy species who had been fighting Council expansion for decades. The age of Council dominance is ending, Marcus concluded. Not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple revelation of truth. The galaxy now knows what lies behind their claims of benevolent leadership. What happens next is up to you. The transmission ended, and, for a moment, the facility was silent except for the distant sound of evacuation ships departing. Then, the Zephyrian telepath gasped, their mental abilities picking up reactions from across known space. Human, they whispered, what have you done? I can feel the thoughts of billions of beings. The galaxy is awakening. Species that have never communicated before are reaching out to each other. The Council's allies are questioning their loyalty. Their enemies are preparing for war. Marcus looked out through the facility's main viewport at the 3 human ships waiting in the darkness of space. Beyond them, he could see the distant lights of Council evacuation vessels fleeing toward the hyperspace jump point. I've done what humans do best, he replied quietly. I've turned a disadvantage into an opportunity. The Council wanted to study us to understand what makes humanity dangerous. Now they know, we don't just fight wars. We changed the rules of war itself. The ghost of Terra was free, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the liberation of Detention Facility Prime, High Counselor Zephyx sat in what had once been the most powerful office in known space and watched their empire crumble through the vast windows of the Council's central command station. The view that had once shown the orderly movement of 1,000 worlds now displayed the chaos of open rebellion. Ships from dozens of species that had been Council subjects for centuries were converging on the station, not as supplicants seeking permission or guidance, but as equals demanding answers. The broadcast from Marcus Chen had ignited something that the Council had spent millennia preventing: unity among the diverse species of the galaxy. For the first time in recorded history, civilizations were working together without Council oversight or approval. The Kraxan hegemony has officially withdrawn from all Council treaties, reported Aidvex, their voice carefully neutral despite the catastrophic implications. They're demanding reparations for the experimentation performed on their citizens and threatening military action if we refuse. The Zephyrian Collective has closed all their space to Council vessels, added another aide. They claim their telepaths are providing evidence of Council war crimes to any species willing to listen. And the Silicate Confederacy? Zephyx asked, though they already knew the answer. They've joined the alliance that's forming around Earth. 17 species have signed mutual defense pacts in the past week alone, with more negotiations scheduled daily. Zephyx dismissed the aides with a gesture and turned back to the viewport. In the distance, they could see the sleek hull of a human dreadnought, one of the new ships that Earth had somehow constructed using technology reverse-engineered from Council systems. The vessel was massive, nearly the size of a Council star destroyer, but it moved with an agility that defied conventional engineering principles. Remarkable, came a voice from behind them. Dr. Crix entered the office, carrying a data pad filled with intelligence reports about human activities since the facility incident. 6 months ago, they were a primitive species with barely functional space travel. Now they're building ships that outclass our own designs. How is that possible? Zephyx asked, though they suspected they knew the answer. Marcus Chen didn't just escape from our facility, Crix replied. He downloaded our entire technical database before he left. 3,000 years of council research and development handed over to a species that can reverse engineer and improve upon any technology they encounter.
We created the perfect intelligence asset and then gave him unrestricted access to our most sensitive information. The irony was not lost on Zethix.
The council had captured Chen to study human capabilities, and, in doing so, had provided him with everything he needed to destroy their empire.
What's the current status of our military forces?
40% of our fleets have defected to the Alliance, Crix reported grimly. Another 30% are refusing orders and demanding explanations for our detention policies.
The remaining 30% are loyal, but they're vastly outnumbered by the coalition forces gathering around Earth. And our allies? We don't have any.
The species that supported us did so because they feared our military superiority. Now that superiority no longer exists, they're abandoning us as quickly as possible.
Zethix studied the data pad Crix had brought, noting the astronomical casualty figures from recent skirmishes.
Every time Council forces engaged the new alliance, they were defeated with minimal losses to their enemies. Human tactical doctrine, combined with the diverse capabilities of their allied species, had proven devastatingly effective against traditional Council strategies.
There's something else, Crix continued, their voice dropping to a whisper. Our intelligence networks have detected unusual activity in the Outer Rim territories.
Species we've never made contact with before are sending ships toward the core systems. Chen's broadcast reached farther than we initially realized.
How much farther? We're detecting transmission echoes from as far as the Andromeda Galaxy. The message has been amplified and retransmitted by hundreds of civilizations.
If there are other spacefaring species out there, they know what the Council has been doing.
The implications hit Zethix like a physical blow.
The Council had maintained power through isolation as much as military force, carefully controlling which species could communicate with each other and preventing the formation of large alliances. Chen's broadcast had shattered those barriers permanently. The galaxy was no longer a collection of isolated civilizations that could be dominated one at a time. It was becoming a unified community capable of collective action.
"Sir," came a voice from the office communication system. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting permission to dock."
"Requesting?"
Zethix asked with bitter amusement.
"They have enough firepower to destroy this station."
"Why are they asking permission?"
"Because," said a new voice as the office door slid open, "humans believe in giving their enemies a chance to surrender with dignity." Marcus Chen walked into the office wearing the dress uniform of an Earthfleet admiral, flanked by representatives from a dozen different species.
Zethix recognized several faces from their facility's former prisoner population, though all of them looked far healthier than they had during their captivity. "Admiral Chen," Zethix said, using his new title deliberately. "I assume you're here to discuss terms for our surrender."
"Actually, I'm here to offer you a job," Marcus replied, taking a seat at Zethix's own conference table without invitation.
"The galaxy needs leadership, High Counselor. The question is whether that leadership will be imposed through force or built through cooperation." "You're suggesting we work together?" Crix asked incredulously. "After everything that's happened?"
"I'm suggesting that the Council's original mission, maintaining peace and facilitating communication between species, was actually a good idea," Marcus said. "Your methods were horrific, but your goals had merit. The new Galactic Alliance needs institutions that can coordinate between hundreds of different civilizations. The question is whether you want to be part of building something better or if you prefer to be remembered only for your failures."
Zethix studied the human carefully, trying to understand what kind of trap this might be. "What exactly are you proposing?"
"A truth and reconciliation process," Marcus replied. "Full disclosure of all Council activities, reparations for species that were harmed by your policies, and the establishment of new governing structures based on consent rather than coercion. In exchange, Council officials who cooperate fully will be granted amnesty and offered positions in the new galactic government."
"And if we refuse?"
Marcus gestured toward the viewport, where the combined fleet of the new alliance stretched as far as the eye could see.
"Then, you'll be remembered as the empire that chose destruction over redemption."
"Your choice, High Counselor." The offer was more generous than Zethix had expected,
but they understood the strategic thinking behind it. Marcus wasn't just defeating the council, he was building something to replace it. That required institutions, expertise, and administrative capabilities that could only come from people who had experience governing on a galactic scale. The council has committed terrible crimes, the Kraxan representative interjected, their voice rumbling with barely controlled anger. Simple amnesty seems insufficient. Justice isn't about punishment, Marcus replied. It's about preventing future harm and rebuilding what was damaged. We can spend the next century fighting over the past, or we can work together to build a future where no one has to suffer what you endured. The Zephyrian telepath stepped forward, their mental voice reaching everyone in the room simultaneously. The human speaks truth. I can sense no deception in his thoughts. He genuinely believes cooperation will serve the galaxy better than continued conflict. There's another factor to consider, added the silicate representative, their crystalline form reflecting the office lights in prismatic patterns. Our monitoring stations have detected ships approaching from outside the galaxy. Chen's broadcast has attracted attention from civilizations we never knew existed. The internal politics of our galaxy may soon become irrelevant if we face external threats. Zethix absorbed this information, recognizing the larger pattern Marcus was revealing. The human hadn't just liberated himself and toppled an empire, he had fundamentally changed the nature of galactic civilization. The age of isolated species and competing empires was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in known history, true interstellar cooperation. What guarantees do we have? Zethix asked. How do we know this alliance won't simply become a new form of tyranny once it consolidates power? Marcus smiled, and Zethix was surprised to see genuine warmth in the expression. Because humans learned a long time ago what happens when power becomes concentrated in too few hands. The new galactic constitution includes term limits for all leadership positions, mandatory rotation of authority between species, and absolute protection for individual rights regardless of species origin. You've written a constitution already? We've written 17 different versions, Marcus replied. Each one has been debated, revised, and improved by representatives from every species in the Alliance. The current draft includes input from over 300 different civilizations, with more contributions arriving daily. Dr. Crix looked up from the datapad they had been consulting. Admiral, our intelligence suggests you have access to Council archives dating back 3 millennia. Why do you need our cooperation at all? Because information isn't the same as wisdom, Marcus answered. You've governed this galaxy for thousands of years. You understand the complexities, the cultural tensions, the practical challenges that can't be learned from archives. We need that knowledge if we're going to build something that lasts. And our people? Zethix asked. What happens to the billions of Council citizens who've known no other form of government? They become equal members of the galactic community, Marcus said simply. No species is excluded from the Alliance because of their past government's actions. We're more interested in what you can contribute to the future than what you've done in the past. Zethix stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the vast fleet that represented the New Order. Ships from hundreds of different worlds, designs ranging from elegant curves to brutal angles, all working together toward common goals. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. High Counselor, came another voice from the communication system. We're receiving reports from across Council space. Our remaining loyal forces are requesting instructions. Do we fight or do we stand down? Zethix thought of the billions of beings under Council authority, the countless worlds that would burn if this conflict escalated into total war. They thought of the alternatives Marcus was offering, the possibility of redemption rather than destruction. Most importantly, they thought of the future, not just for the Council, but for all the species that called this galaxy home. Stand down, they said finally. All Council forces are to cease hostile actions immediately and prepare for integration with Alliance forces. High Counselor, several aides protested simultaneously. The decision is made, Zethix said firmly. Admiral Chen, the Galactic Council formally surrenders its authority and requests to join your alliance as equals rather than conquerors. Marcus stood and extended his hand, the human gesture of partnership and agreement. Welcome to the galactic community, High Counselor. We have a lot of work to do. As Zethix accepted the handshake, they realized they were witnessing something that had never occurred in recorded history: the peaceful transformation of galactic civilization. The human who had once been their prisoner had become the architect of a new age, one built on cooperation rather than domination. The Council had spent 3 years trying to understand what made humans dangerous. Now they finally had their answer. Humans didn't just adapt to circumstances. They changed circumstances to suit their vision of what the universe should become. Marcus Chen had been caged as a prisoner and had emerged as a liberator. The galaxy would never be the same. In the months and years that followed, historians would debate whether the transformation had been inevitable or if it required the unique combination of factors that Marcus Chen represented. What they all agreed on was the date when everything changed, the day the Council watched in horror as Earth's supreme combatant was set free. But Marcus had never really been freed from his cage. Instead, he had shown the galaxy that the cage itself was an illusion, and that true freedom came not from escaping the bonds that held you, but from having the courage to break them for everyone else as well.